Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
You are listening to the financialsurvivalnetwork.com. I'm Kerry Lutz on 1230 WBZT. So a lot of broken promises are coming down the pike. Obamacare is really just the tip of the iceberg. We got Social Security. We got so many others, which is why Dennis Miller of millersmoney.com is on with us now. Dennis, welcome back to the Financial Survival Network.
Always a pleasure, Kerry. Nice to talk to you.
Hey, you too. So you're in the process of putting together a webinar called America's Broken Promise, Strategies for Retirement Worth Living. And obviously that name belies a lot under the surface, which is that if you don't have a strategy, if you just ignore what's going on and continue along your merry way, come retirement time, you're going to be grateful to have a job being a greeter at Walmart, right?
Kerry, it's certainly looking that way. You know, we put together this webinar, and part of the webinar was to really bring to light what you just said. We've got a phenomenal lineup. We've got John Stossel from Fox Business News, David Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States, Jeff White, who's the President and CEO of American Financial Group, and yours truly. And basically, we're starting out with the premise that we better recognize that there have been a lot of promises that are being broken by our government that is going to affect our retirement. And, you know, understanding that, what can we do about it? And the more I got into it, just absolutely amazing when you start to look at what the impact of these broken promises are going to have on our society, particularly those who are thinking about retiring.
Hey, you know, a frequent guest on the Financial Survival Network is Dr. Lawrence Kotlikoff, a very noted, respected economist from Boston University, and he's talking $220 trillion of underfunded liabilities from Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, so many other programs. The money just isn't going to exist to pay for it, and their ability to engage in inflationary tactics to pay for it is going to be limited, which means out and out default. And when you get down to out and out default, where they just say, sorry, Charlie, the money's not there, and you're going to have to fend for yourself. And yeah, like, sure, the elderly population has the highest voter rates, and you know, but in a way they're the most helpless, they're the most dependent, and really they're going to be on their own.
Well, it's interesting. I've got an article in front of me, Cries of Betrayal as Detroit Plans to Cut Pensions, in the New York Times. And there's just one guy that they interviewed in there which just sums it all up. Does Detroit have a problem? Absolutely. Did I create it? I don't think so. They made me some promises, and I made them some promises. I kept my promises. They're not going to keep theirs. And whether it's city, local, or as you even talked about in Social Security, the cupboard's bare. John Stossel and both David Walker really have some statistics to bear out what you just said. But Kerry, there's another element that comes into play. We're sitting down and showing people how to sit down and build a financial plan. And we actually took a real-life couple, and we changed their names. And they were 50 years old, and they wanted to retire at 65. And we showed them if they kept doing what they're doing, they're not going to make it. So they have to fill up the gap. They have to make up part of the gap to have enough equity to supplement their Social Security. Well, at 50, it took them so much a month that they had to save additionally. At 55, that doubled. At 60, it quadrupled. Now, when you stop and think about it, average baby boomer, 1946 to 1964, the average baby boomer, the mean rather, is 59 years old. So our whole country is there. And the reality is I looked at a graph recently where it showed all the states and what percentage they were unfunded. And, you look at it and say, well, geez, we're only 20% underfunded. That doesn't make any difference. Underfunded is underfunded. Social Security is even worse. And people are going to have to wake up and understand that we can't rely on the government. We have to rely on ourselves. And the sooner they realize that and put together a strategy, the better off they're going to be. I mean, there's only so many Walmart greeters jobs available out there, Kerry.
Yeah, well, there's also cashiers, I guess, at the quick serve and the gas station. But yeah, at some point you run out of those positions, and you're really going to have problems. You're basically going to be left to sell your living room furniture on eBay, literally, and the old cliche of dog food and eating dog food or pharmaceuticals. One thing, Dennis, that people don't talk about that I've just discovered for myself, because I'm 3 years under the median age of the baby boomers, you can do the math, is you have to do everything you can to bolster your health. You need to change your diet today. If you're not eating healthy, if you're overweight, if you're on a bunch of statin drugs and you're on blood sugar, blood pressure, you can change that right away. And I'd love to see people start integrating health lectures, health seminars into financial, because you know what, Dennis? The two are totally one, because the better your health is, the less you spend on doctors, co-pays, trips to the emergency room, pharmaceutical drugs to keep you going, and the less you spend on unhealthy foods and junk foods. Trips to the fast food outlet wind up costing you a lot more money than cooking healthy food in your own home.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because Casey Conference is having just a headliner conference coming up in Tucson in October, and they've actually asked me to lecture on retirement basics. And I go into this, and I have a bunch of different circles for things that you do, and I have bold lines around two of those circles. One is financial and one is health. Because if our financial health is not in order, and if our physical health is not in order, the rest of it's immaterial anyway. You're exactly right. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and hey, I'm here in Florida, you're here in Florida, and you see this stuff all the time, Dennis. And you know what? At the time to start with your health, and I've been on this kick, and people are you're probably getting annoyed listening to me, and the time to do it, just like the time with financial health, is before you get sick, before you go broke. Start planning your financial health, start planning your physical health before you need to, and it'll make all the difference in the world to you.
Kerry, I'm looking at something right now. If your listeners, you may be preaching to the choir by the quality of your listeners, but Employee Benefit Research Institute study shows that 58% of workers have not even tried to calculate how much they will need in retirement, let alone put a plan in place. Well, it's probably the same thing on the physical health side. And the real message is the government is not going to help us. They are breaking promises left and right. They're breaking the Social Security promises. When we hear a politician say, I'm going to fix Social Security, that's a code word for weasel out of the deal. And we're going to have to get both the physical and financial side where it needs to be so that we can truly enjoy our golden years. It still can be done. It's not too late, but the clock is ticking.
Yeah, you make such a great point. When they say fix Social Security, when you and I think of fixing something, it's like, hey, there's something wrong with your car, and you take it to the mechanic, and he diagnoses the problem. It's a replacement part, gets that part, takes out the defective or the broken part, puts in the new part, and your car runs as good or better than new. When politicians talk about fixing something, it's like they disassemble the whole thing and they make it work worse than it did before, and it performs under or worse than the specifications that it was designed to run at. And effectively a lot of people get screwed in the process, and that's what you have to know. They have no intention of fixing anything. Their thing is, how did they change things to basically screw over the largest number of people without them realizing that they've been screwed over effectively, right? Isn't that what it's about?
Absolutely. Well, the reality is the politicians want to get elected. Their goal is to get elected. And, when we talk about broken promises, one of the things that I've come to realize is we need to understand what those broken promises are, Kerry. I can sit there and I can recite the trillions of dollars just like you did. Every politician knows those numbers. They recite them every election cycle when they say, vote for me, I'm going to cut spending, I'm going to balance the budget, and I'm going to fix Social Security. But they never do. And so the sooner we realize that the promises that are being broken are political promises made by politicians to get elected, call them what they really are. Because once we realize that we need to get on track and get our financial and physical health in order.
Yeah, it's really what it comes down to is that they're promises that the politicians made, and they might have been made with the best of intentions when they were made, although I doubt that because, the old joke is, how do you know a politician is lying? Well, it's simple as lips are moving. And, I think we should talk more about this up next, about specific things that you can do to prepare for this era of government broken promises. I'm here with Dennis Miller on the FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com, 1230 WBZT. So you know that I start out most of my days at a certain coffee shop that will go nameless. And now I take my coffee in a thermos. You need to try this amazing new roaster out of LA, Tonks Coffee. These guys are fanatical about delivering the best beans in the world. They source directly from growers, roast it, and ship it within 24 hours, so it's as fresh as it can possibly be. Every 2 weeks, you get a new batch of incredible beans roasted to perfection. If you're hitting a cafe most mornings, like me, this is much, much better, and it's cheaper too. It's the best way to get great coffee. Tonks is by subscription only, and they'll give you a free sample just for listening to the Financial Survival Network. Go to tonks.org/liberty and get some for yourself, or send it to somebody you know who appreciates finer coffee. Tonks.org/liberty, and send me an email. Let me know how you like it. I promise it's the best coffee you've ever tasted. We're back on the FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. I'm Kerry Lutz with Dennis Miller of MillersMoney.com on 1230 WBZT. So Dennis, specific things that you can do now as a baby boomer, so you're not waiting for the axe to fall. You're not waiting for the inevitable, because a lot of you out there, you know that this is coming. You've been told that Social Security is a dead-end street with a car racing down 80 miles an hour. You know the money's not going to be there. Well, you don't think there'll be an outright default. You know that your dollars are not going to go as far, that they're inflating their way out of this. So 3 things that quickly that you can do, Dennis, to not be left holding the bag, as it were.
Well, the first thing I would suggest, and I really appreciate the opportunity, if your listeners want to go to www.americasbrokenpromise.org, and I think you're going to put that up on your website.
Absolutely.
It is a free webinar, so the price is right, and we're going to discuss those issues very clearly in the webinar. That's exactly why we put it together, for the need that you have mentioned. And I think once people recognize how serious it is, that they can't afford to put it back any longer, we are going to be talking about, here's the problem. Very clearly, you're going to see what it is, and whether it's The fact that the one that happened in my generation, when the government pulled the rug out from under us, when they decided to bail out the banks, or if you happen to be somebody in a federal or a state or a local pension or Social Security, it makes no difference whether those promises were made in good faith. The money's not there. They're going to have to break the promise. So the second part of what we're going to focus on in our webinar is to show people how to get started. They need to start with some sort of I call it an annual checkup, like you do for your health, to get a fiscal checkup. They've got these sophisticated computer programs where they can show you where you are and where you need to be and how you can get there, so that despite the broken promises, we can enjoy our golden years. It can be done. There's tools that are available to do it, and that's what we're going to be talking about on this upcoming webinar. It's September 5th. It's free. It'll be 2 o'clock Eastern, and that's exactly what we're going to show them, step by step. Here's how you go about getting back on the right track.
Yeah, well, it's such a valuable thing that you're doing there, because so few people are addressing it. And even, you go to conventional financial planners, what are they really telling you out there, Dennis?
Well, the financial planners are really trying to perform a service. But I'll tell you one of the biggest things that I learned, and that is that we're working with Jeff White, who's the CEO of one of these large financial planning services. And he said when people come in, they're obviously apprehensive and nervous. And then when they go through the process of showing where they are, they have what they call an epiphany moment, where we realize, my gosh, we better get serious about saving money for retirement. And he said it's amazing, because once they get to that point, then where to save and where to cut back and how to deal with it, they generally design their own plan and make it work. And he said every year they come in for their next annual checkup, and they're all excited because they're right on target. So the reality is that when people get started and work with these people, if they're with a good financial advisor, they'll sit down and put together a plan that works for them. But it's like he called it that epiphany moment where we realize it's time to get serious. We can't ignore it any longer.
Hey, what about gold and silver? Obviously, I think at anybody's financial plan, they should play a role in this day and age.
Well, particularly, Kerry, when you're talking about weaseling out of the Social Security. The one way the federal government has over the state and the local governments to weasel out of their commitments is by creating inflation, so that they might be giving us so much a month in Social Security. The CPI increases are a joke. It's not even close to what real inflation is. And that we're going to have to be protecting ourselves from government-induced inflation so they can weasel out of the deal. And one of the best ways to do that is to have in our core holdings a substantial amount of gold and silver, the best hedge against inflation going.
Yeah, that's a proven fact. We've seen it time and again. Sure, we saw it in the 70s when inflation exploded. So did the price of gold and silver. And certainly we've seen inflation pick up over the past few years, although you wouldn't really know it if you landed from another planet. You were an alien and you landed here and you looked at the government CPI numbers, you would think, hey, these guys got everything under control, no problem, prices. Although if you went to the butcher shop, you went to the supermarket, you went to fill up your car with gasoline, and you went to buy commodities, or you went and you had a Thanksgiving dinner, all of a sudden it would hit you squarely in the jaw, wouldn't it?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Kerry, one of the things that I wrote an article on a few months back is some of the plans that are on the table now to theoretically fix Social Security. And one of the items that they were looking at is what they call a chained CPI. And it takes what they're doing now, which is basically fabricating the numbers to the next power. In other words, if the price of steak gets too high, well, then they're just going to say, well, you'll eat hamburger instead. Well, what happens when the price of hamburger gets too high? Are we going to go to dog food? And it's basically getting congressional approval to fabricate the inflation numbers even further. You know, when we got a 1.7%, I think it was, increase in Social Security, and our Medicare premiums that were taken out of our Social Security was 3 times higher than that, we ought to get a clue that somebody's not telling the truth here, Kerry.
Yeah, it's. I think they're going to what I'm referring to as the Marie Antoinette Index, which is the let 'em eat cake index. You know, because that's what it comes down to. It's like, oh, you can't afford that? Let 'em eat cake, right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on here. Who are we kidding here? You know, I'll grant you they've dumbed down education pretty good, but you know, you go to the gas station, you fill up your tank, and it costs you, you know, people are driving these big SUVs, cost $125 to fill up your tank. You learn about inflation pretty quickly firsthand, don't you?
And you know what I find amazing is that if we listen to the people that just go to the grocery store. You know, I ran an article about inflation earlier in the spring, and our readers gave me specific examples. And the average of all of the reader feedback, and I got thousands of feedback, was around 8%, was what they said it was in their life. And that's how our Social Security is going to get destroyed if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And it happens, it's very subtle. It doesn't just happen all at once, but it's happening. There's no question about it. And if you don't plan for it now, it's going to overtake you. And look, you and I, we know the charts. You go back to 1913, followed up to now, the dollar's lost 90, depending which one you look at, anywhere from 95 to 98% of its value since then. But we've had these remarkable increases in productivity, so a lot of that loss of purchasing power has been muted, but not if you eat things like bread and coffee and beef and chicken. You know, you can look at the numbers, and if you take an ounce of gold, you know, hey, the ounce of gold that you purchased back then was $20 an ounce, and it bought a suit of men's clothes for an ounce of gold. Now, a good suit, you know, buy it for $1,300. It's real simple, $1,400 the ounce for an ounce of gold. You know, certain truisms, they're just so true that you really don't need to question them that much. A good men's suit has always sold for about an ounce of gold, right?
Yeah, and I think that's where people misunderstand that. I think that a lot of times people say, well, you should buy gold, and you're looking at it like a stock that you think is going to go up in value. No, the people that I know that have substantial holdings in gold and silver are doing it to protect their lifestyle. It might take $1,300 to buy a suit as opposed to $35 to buy a suit, but at least if you have the ounce of gold, you can still afford the suit because your dollars are worthless. And that's the fundamental core because, you know, Kerry, I'm very concerned about something. You know, the Fed has said, we're going to keep interest rates down, we're going to keep interest rates down, and they're going in there with all their bond buying. But if you'll notice over the last month or so, the long-term Treasury, the interest rates have jumped up over 1%. And when that gets out of control, where people are saying, and I'm talking about the governments that buy our bonds and buy our debt, saying, you either pay us more interest or we don't want your money. When that gets out of control, then we're going to see that inflation. And I'm sitting here predicting it's on the horizon, but I'm looking at this and I'm saying people have a right to be concerned at this point. You know, I haven't lightened up any on my gold. As a matter of fact, I recently bought some more.
Okay, good move. And you know, Dennis, just give us again the website where we're going to find that webinar, because I think, hey, if you're over 55, you really need to know about this, because if you haven't been thinking about the eroding purchasing power of the dollar, how that plays into the fact that one day you might want to retire or semi-retire. You want to do traveling, you want to hang out with the grandkids, your kids more, and you want to put less emphasis into work. These are things that you really need to be thinking about, because it's going to make it all possible.
That's for sure, Kerry. And there's two different kinds of work when you're retiring. There's work because you want to, and then there's work because you have to in order to put money on the table. And those are two different ball games entirely. We can go again to www.americasbrokenpromise.org, and you can sign up for free. Take a look at what we're talking about, because in fact we're going to talk about the problem, and then we're going to show you the process to get your fiscal house in order, so that you're not going to be one of those folks that are in the first group working because they have to. And that's really what we're all about.
Hey, and you and I see so many people in that first group in Florida here. It's not even funny, and it's downright sad and depressing at times. And obviously, you just got to say a prayer for those people and go on. But the best thing you can do is not be one of them. And Dennis, can't thank you enough for coming on. FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. We'll have this up along with a link to that site a little later in the day. And it's always a pleasure, Dennis, especially because you're performing a service that once upon a time, I don't want to say that this is the government's responsibility to perform, because really, let's face it, it's against their interest to perform it. And really, you're an adult. You're responsible for doing this on your own. Take responsibility. Once upon a time, that's what this country was all about. But Dennis, it's really valuable what you're doing, and a personal, heartfelt thank you.
Well, Kerry, and I appreciate it, because in my heart, I also, and I'm going to take the last word on you, I guess, I see so many of those people like you talked to that worked hard, paid their taxes, live by the rules and save their money. And they did everything right, and they're still going to get blindsided. And yes, I have great concern for those people, because they live by the rules. It's just that simple.
Okay. Well, live by the rules, but learn the other rules, the real rules of the game. And that's what Dennis is really teaching you, along with the other group of the speakers that are going to be there. And you learn the real rules, you got a chance of getting through it. Dennis, again, just one more time that URL, and then we'll conclude.
Yes, thank you very much, Kerry. www.americasbrokenpromise.org.
Hey.
And thanks again.
Hey, a pleasure. Thank you. FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. Don't forget, hey, we're on Liberty Express Radio. It's the only libertarian radio that streams 24/7. My partner Alan Butler's on there. So is Peter Schiff. We got so many great people on there. And just listen, you'll see I'm on there 2 hours a day. I can't even believe I find things to say 2 hours a day, but somehow I do the deed. And FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. All right. Be well there, Dennis.
Thank you, Kerry.
Hi, it's Kerry Lutz. I recently decided to move my retirement account into physical precious metals to hedge against the coming times. If you want to move an existing retirement account into physical precious metals that you can hold in your hand, tax-free, there's no company that can do it more quickly and efficiently than Regal Assets. It took them just 24 hours to open my new IRA account, and all I had to do was fill out one simple form. The best part is that Regal Assets does all the work for you. They cover the setup and administrative costs for 2013. If you're interested in making the same move I did, call 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620. That's 855-678-6620, or visit them at regalassets.com. You'll be glad you did, and tell them Kerry sent you.
The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.